Welcome, everybody. This is D Durrell with D Durrell Life Solutions. I hope everybody is having an excellent day today. Um, we're going to have a discussion today in which we're going to talk about my experiences working with domestic violence issues. I took it upon myself to take the time out today to focus on this particular issue, being that I am associated with some other sectors in which this issue has come to the forefront. And there are people, in my opinion, are behaving in ways that I think are somewhat atypical of what most people would in or out of the virtual world. I'm going to chronologize, my experience working with people who experience domestic violence as it involves the victim, the perpetrator, family members who are trying to influence the victim to get out, family members who are trying to encourage the perpetrator to stop, or family members who tend to, you know, have a blind eye to what is going on and excuse that behavior. Also, lastly, we're going to talk about the dynamic of how domestic violence affects children in a family environment. Any other sectors that I'm involved in, people being theatrical, people are purposely acting aloof to the situation. People are acting in very immature ways. People are being theatrical, um, you know, off base, colorful, and then in some ways downright ignorant about domestic violence. So my perspective today is to give a professional outlook on what domestic violence looks like, as far as in a clinical sense, how it's treated, the long-term effects, and whether or not the parties involved can grow from this, heal from it, and move further. First of all, to let it be known, I will also speak from the perspective of being in the Black community and what that looks like in our community, how it presents itself, and how people perceive victims in our community. Although in my professional career, I have counseled and treated people of all races, ages, ethnicities, and socioeconomical backgrounds. As far as my memory can go, as far as in my profession, I began treating people with domestic violence as early as 2007. Many of the domestic violence related clients that I had were people who were involved in child protective services of the Department of Family Protective Services. And it was mandated by those government agencies. Many of those particular situations, it was also mandated that either the children left the environment or the perpetrator, which in 90% of the time was a man, had to leave the household. In many of those situations, the man that was the perpetrator or abusing his wife, his girlfriend, or whatever you would label it, that particular person was also or had a tendency to be abusive towards the children, whether physical or verbal or emotional. And many times we tend to forget that the trauma of witnessing a family member experiencing and coping with domestic violence can be quite heartening, can be quite disturbing, and it has long-term effects as far as how those children perceive the opposite sex, how they perceive relationships, and how they will treat their future partner. Now, when I began working in CPS as a contractor, I was actually a subcontractor for another company for about 3 years before I went into business for myself and I obtained my own contract. Many of these clients were middle class to working class clients. And in most situations, the man was forced to leave the home. In many of those situations, the female that was being abused experienced abuse for at least 3 to 5 or more years. It was never short-term situations. In most situations, what I've seen common for women who experience abuse is that they have experienced abuse in multiple relationships and they experienced abuse for long periods of time. And then many have been conditioned to think that dealing with abuse is just a normal part of a relationship, particularly those who witness their mother being treated the same. Some of the characteristics that I would see from women who are experiencing domestic violence, the first thing I want you to understand is that many of them present as if they're scared. They have a very nervous presentation, facial expressions, body language. When they speak, it could either be they're straining to speak or it's very difficult for them to express themselves. They may have a very weak voice. They don't speak with confidence. They speak with a sense of hesitancy and nervousness. When undergoing a clinical interview, particularly a psychosocial assessment, or presenting assessments that focus on abuse and the experience of abuse and the effect of it emotionally, behavioral wise, many of them exhibit symptoms that are in line with post-traumatic stress disorder. Whether it is diagnosed or undiagnosed. Many of them may also experience some level of anxiety or stress-related illness. Many of these particular women repetitively want to enter another toxic relationship, and they don't know how to function when they are involved in a man that does not treat them in such a way that is different than what they're accustomed to. Many of these women put their men above their children. They actually have a tendency to lie a lot and be very deceptive because they are ashamed and don't want people to know that they're being abused. Many of them put on a facade as if they're so strong and they have everything together. And one of the main consistent things that I would hear is that I'm trying to keep my family together. Due to financial abuse, I don't have any money. I have nowhere to go. My family won't accept me. I feel trapped. I feel alone. And the only person there for them is the abuser. Another common theme is that they just want the person to stop. They love the person. They want to continue to be with the person. They're hoping one day that the actual abuse will cease to exist, that the person will grow, improve, heal from themselves, and treat and keep and stop. I'm sorry, and stop treating them this way. A lot of the characteristics and the cognitive distortions that I just previously mentioned pretty much make up a huge amount of what therapy looks like as far as the themes in which I am undergoing cognitive restructuring, excuse me, to help those particular clients improve their perception of the relationship they are in because they perceive those relationships as being functional relationships, typical relationships, relationships that are just normal, the normal part of any life of a female. And in many situations, they may have a tendency to get upset at people that want them to leave, or they get upset when people no longer want to help them because the commonality is that most people who consistently help them beg of them to actually leave that situation. But again, the abused party doesn't want to leave the situation. They simply want the person to stop. Another common thing that grooms a person into domestic violence is that they overlook telltale signs. They overlook a person being extra sensitive about being in control. They overlook the fact that the person wants to spend exorbitant amounts of time with them or wants to limit the time that they spend with other people. They want to constantly dictate and monopolize that person's life. They have a tendency to be somewhat overly caring or expressing themselves as if they care, but in all likelihood, they're trying to control. They camouflage themselves as being gentlemen, caring, loving, giving you all that attention. And for many women, they misinterpret this attention as love, but really it's basically control. In many instances, a lot of women misinterpret this form of control, psychological control, physical abuse as a display of love. This is why so many women who are abused continue to stay abused until one day they decide to leave. Also, the fantasy of going back to the way things were before they were abused, because perpetrators are excellent at hiding them true selves and slowly showing things that the victim may overlook over time. And then one hit becomes an accident. 2 weeks later, I'm sorry. A month later, I'm sorry. Then it becomes so repetitive that it's just a part of the relationship. And again, the victim just wants the perpetrator to stop. Now, let's kind of look at the perpetrator, who's usually 90-95% of the time is a male. Most domestic violence related um, shelters are made for women. They only have about maybe a few throughout the country. And in every major city, you have at least one or two women's shelters, centers, or women's shelter centers that also allows children to be there too. Because again, in a lot of domestic violence relationships, orientated relationships, the man is pretty much has supreme control of every aspect of life. And in that, it surfaces underneath the surface of that, they want to control every aspect of that female's life that limits their interaction with others because they in itself are insecure. Both parties are insecure. The victim is insecure about herself, how she looks, if she has any value. They buy into everything that the person says, the verbal abuse, they suffer from low self-worth. And then also the perpetrator is insecure about losing that partner. So they have a tendency to try to bring this person down, psychologically manipulate them, and to break them to submission to only follow and yield to whatever they like. Both parties have low self-esteem and cognitive distortion, meaning their perception of things is flawed and irrational and is debilitating and dysfunctional. Meaning these men are excellent at being gentlemen, saying all the right things, treating you well, basically grooming you for who and shadowing, or not, I'm not gonna say shadowing, but hiding who they really are unless they are emotionally triggered. And for many of these women, they only remember the good times. So in the framework of experiencing all of this excellent treatment, and then this man slowly hits you one time, 1 month, then another month, then it turns to weeks, and then it comes daily. Because deep inside of this tormented person, they're insecure and uneasy about losing the person that they're abusing because they know deep inside that they are mistreating this person. And there are many men who think that they're in their right to hit a woman, or it's a necessity. And also the trauma as a child of growing up seeing another male, particularly their father, or another male beating up women. Because there is a such thing as a culture, growing up in a culture of domestic violence. There are people who think domestic violence is a normal part of a relationship. There are people who believe that men and women fighting is normal. There are people who believe that you verbally and psychologically abusing someone, financially taking the credit cards or controlling what they spend, how much they eat, where they go, who they hang out with or not, basically shielding people from their families is a sign of love. But in essence, it's a sign of insecurity. This is the true nature of what domestic violence looks like in our community and in other communities. Shout out to the people who are in the chat. Appreciate you for being here. This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions, speaking on my experience working with domestic violence issues. Now, I have over 17 years of experience working with people who have dealt with domestic violence issues. Most of those situations, particularly when I work for government agencies, I had the pleasure of meeting people and healing these families and putting those families back together again strongly so that they can learn and grow from the situations that occurred. But I want you all to understand, putting back the family of domestic violence that has domestic violence is not easy. It is very taxing, and all parties involved have to comply. This is not you go to therapy a few times and, oh, I'm healed now and I move along. it is very necessary for the perpetrator to admit that they're wrong and learn how to deal with adverse situations without putting your hands on someone, without feeling like that this person does not necessarily listen or say to everything that you feel that gives you a right to act out in violence. There are many women who think that that is acceptable. There are many men and women who think that that's acceptable. You should keep your hands to yourself. And that goes with all age groups, whether younger, middle age, elderly. I've seen abuse be carried out across the board. As it involves the perpetrator being involved in relationships, they have a tendency to study who they want to approach, have a tendency to look and search for vulnerable women who may not have a job, low education, don't have too many jobs because they're going to be economically dependent on you, don't have a car. There's always needs. They have a overall appetite to attach themselves to women who may not have the ability to be self-sufficient and are dependent upon them for many aspects of their life. To control is very, very important in the mindset of the abuser. Control of another human being to dictate what they do and what they will not do truly makes up the overall texture of those relationships. The conflict that occurs is that over time, the abuser will harm a person where they will show bruises, they will have some type of health issue, they're going to be stressed out. You can see a difference in the way they interact. The energy is off because an abuser, whether they're around their family or not, or other people, will show signs, whether directly or indirectly, of scaring or making the victim uncomfortable. Whether or not they feel right about or feel justified to treat them the way they want, the reality is that no human being has the right to mistreat another human being just because you want to. That's a human right. Now let's get to the family members, because the family members can be either very helpful or they can also cause problems. In many instances, particularly if they can see the bruises on that particular woman or whoever the man that's been abused, they have a tendency to take your side and go against the person that they don't like. But the reality is that in most of those situations, most families don't like the other partner. So it could be very, very gray areas as it relates to who's being genuine or not about the situation. But one thing that I can say is that in a domestic violence situation, as it involves the other family members, they can also be very helpful, or they can be in some way toxic by saying things and causing more riffraff among the couple itself, getting all in their business, arguing and yelling and cursing the other person out, the perpetrator, whether that person deserved it or not, overstepping your boundaries. But my position is those things can be managed, those things can be altered. Though Both the people involved can heal, grow, and not repeat those behaviors. But within the community, particularly the African American community, many people think, many people process that abuse, domestic violence, the mistreatment of the other partner is a normal part of a relationship. This is basically what relationships are supposed to look like. Many of these relationships reflect what they saw as children, adolescents, adults, how people manage conflicts, how people come to negotiation, the lack of that, leaving the home, the yelling, the cursing, the throwing things, calling of the police. Now let's touch upon calling the police, because that's a very, very tricky topic in itself. Because in many of those situations, when the police is called, the victim doesn't want their partner to be arrested. They want the police to scare them and stop them from ever doing it again. Many of those situations, once the police come and things cool down, they change their mind and say, I don't want to press charges. I think things in cat just want you to stop. Once that has been satisfied, the woman continues to move on. But the problem is that we're basically enabling the man to hit you or be aggressive again, because in his mind, in processing, he thinks that he's going to be able to get off and that will be overlooked. And these are just facts. So again, once again, I appreciate you all for being here. This is D. Durrell Life Solutions, my experience working with domestic violence issues. And this is of women of all ages, men of all ages. I've had situations where men were abused. I've had situations where men were abused. I repeat, this is not just about the issue of women coping with being a victim. I have seen situations on both sides where the person being abused, where the male or female, became highly dysfunctional and out of control because of what occurred. Some people struggle with coping with the aftermath of domestic violence the rest of their life. And that's just the facts. Let's get the children. You're talking about the women side, the male side, perpetrator versus the victim. We're looking at the family members, the third parties that can trigger more negative interaction. Then lastly, creating trauma amongst your children by allowing them to frequently see how adults, as women and men are married or not, how they should not, and I repeat, should not function, if, as an adult. This particular live stream is not just relegated. It's not relegated to just simply looking at it from the surface level. I'm talking about all integral parts, all interactive parts of all parties who make up that environment. Because when I have engaged in family therapy amongst the wife, the husband, boyfriend or girlfriend, and their children, and then sometimes we have an in-law that may be involved. But again, a lot of family or people that are not involved can show signs of apathy for whatever reason they see fit. Although many, although all relationships that involve a level of domestic violence, they all present themselves in different manners, different shapes. and the people respond likewise. But in therapy itself, particularly family therapy, there's a common theme of either fear of the dad, uneasy about talking to him, or angriness, being angry towards him. For the mother, the support, they just want mom to leave or have the courage to put them in a better environment. I've seen situations where the man was abused, where certain things happened that were distasteful, of harming the family. People looking at the family in certain ways because the mother didn't leave. Many abusers get with people they think or know that they can manipulate, mistreat, misuse for whatever they want to, and then they leave them alone. They move on. There's countless examples that I can think of where when someone talked about domestic violence being an issue, many of those situations, the current situation they're involved in is usually the third, fourth, or fifth relationship as the first. That has been my experience. And even to 2024, as I continue to treat people with domestic violence issues, those same issues persist. Some of those situations, there's a no contact order among the dad of the children based on his behavior. But these are the dynamics. Again, we're talking about the perpetrator, the victim, female or male on either side of the spectrum. Third party people such as family, friends, co-workers who want you to leave and you refuse to leave based on the possibility of things getting back to the way they were or things getting better. But this is what it looks like. So in a individual standpoint, as treating a victim, I encourage people to accept that you were victimized, but we're going to learn from preventing you from being in that position again. So in session, it can be emotional as a person expresses themselves as far as all of the trauma that they have endured and have to get through in order to move forward. So these are the things that they work with. These are the things that scare the children, scare the mother, the other family members. Now, of course, in those particular sessions, the family at hand can get very aggressive. As we look at how aggressive they can be aggressive towards others. They don't want you in their business. Aggressive towards the children. Children can be more aggressive towards other children. Now, so I've engaged in domestic violence treatment, particularly with the persons as an individual and also as a couple. I've shown a great deal of success using both models. The biggest step in working on yourself to get out of these relationships is to make the decision to leave. That's the hardest decision, to leave. What's up, business connections? What's up? Someone reached out to me. They want assistance with mental health. I will send you the I gotta cash out. Man, I gotta start sending you some money, man. I gotta when I catch you, man, you've been helping a brother out. I've made tons of I've made thousands off of your referrals, business connection. Appreciate it. Matter of fact, I talked to one client today that you referred me, and I'm looking forward to going back to Dallas to help them get their business started. Appreciate it, man. You need anything from me, Kay? I'm here for you, brother. What's up, Femi, with the smoke? Appreciate you for being here. I am outlining what domestic violence looks like clinically in the clinical setting, what it looks like in the community, particularly in the Black community. I also want to point out that it disheartens me to witness the level of people. Now, I don't believe in exposing people. I don't believe in exposing people. I don't believe in looking up people's information and doxing them. And those who have admitted and have stressed sentiments of abusing women. And I also don't think that it's great to hear women who want to cause bodily harm to men. But in so many situations, and I've been on YouTube now for 8 years, of the people who have had domestic violence charges. Now, there was a time in certain spaces where they would claim, I didn't do nothing. It wasn't my fault. Hold on one second, guys. Okay, guys, I'm back. I'm back. So I took it upon myself to talk about this because the further along that I have reached into my career, the more and more domestic violence cases that I experience. The height of experiencing domestic violence cases was during COVID. There were a lot of situations amongst couples during the beginning of 2020 up until probably the middle of 2022, where I constantly had issues of people causing harm to each other. 90% of the time, it was men causing harm to women. Some of those situations, the man was not only abusive to the woman, but also abusive towards the children. And about 10% of the time, it was women that were verbally abusive or also physically abusive towards their male partner. I don't consider domestic violence situations a laughing matter. I take it very serious because I've had cases that were very, very serious. I've even had cases that made national news. I've had cases where one partner almost took the life of the other partner. And I've definitely had many situations where one person was in need of medical attention. Now, I will preface again. I am not a fan of people doxing others and looking up their information to expose the fact that they have domestic violence charges. However, more importantly, I watch I watch very carefully how these spaces respond to the particular person that had the charges, whether or not that person had multiple charges that were dropped, or whether or not they were convicted of a felony or misdemeanor as far as abuse. That's what I look for. Appreciate you for coming in. Unadulterated Truth. He states, our community has a way of rationalizing the behavior, especially using the prevailing view of police as a reason not to snitch. The covering can actually embolden abusers. It does. And this comes from men and women. And in many situations, there are always these family secrets of what happens in the home, stays in the home. This is something that is taught within the Black community. But when another human being physically attacks or harms another human being, that has to be taught as a negative behavior. But more importantly, my main purpose is to paint a picture so that you all can understand on the ground in the community what domestic violence relationships look like, how they persist, and how it is so repetitive and how people continue this cycle from one partner to another, male or female. A woman who is victimized probably had 2 or 3 other men that victimized them the same. A man who abuses women has probably abused several other women throughout his life, and then both parties may have witnessed their family members or their immediate family display the same behavior. If you didn't get anything out of what I've talked about today, if you understand the pathology of people who think that they deserve to be hit, or the fact that a man treats them this way is a sign of love, or that they care about, and a man who thinks that doing this, or a woman who thinks of being physical with the other person, same sex or opposite sex, that this is an act of love. But what troubles me, again, I'm not for the doxing, but if the doxing exposes this person, which is none of my business, because I do believe that, and there are plenty of men who have engaged in domestic violence that learned and they healed and they no longer practice that behavior. But in these spaces, there's a tendency for people to prompt up certain people, particularly the perpetrator, glamorize this person for a variety of different reasons, because they like the way this person looks, their style, their content, because you just merely just like them because I just deal with them on in the virtual world, and they overlook the flaws, the glaring flaws, because you like them. And then there are people who overlook someone that they like, but then someone they dislike, they have venom for them. And both parties committed the same behavior, regardless of who was worse or not. These are facts. This is what domestic violence looks like, or domestic violence issues look like in a virtual environment. The virtual environment of YouTube and in other social media aspects, people really don't give a damn. Because for many, I'm here to be entertained. I don't know them. They don't know me, which is true. But however, That's inconsistency where that mindset only applies to the person that you like. However, the person you don't like, they're the worst person in the world. At the end of this, I'm looking at things in its totality as it involves all parties: the victim, the perpetrator, the family, the children, or friends. Because everybody is affected, whether directly or indirectly. Because a person that is experiencing domestic violence will reach out to others, will repetitively reach out to others whenever they're in crises, wanting them to help. And those family members who want to help are constantly preaching, you need to leave. And the victim says, no. Can you just make him stop? Yep. This is what domestic violence looks like. Perpetrator wants the person to stop. They don't want to leave. And the victim doesn't want them to leave. They just want them to stop. And the perpetrator thinks that they're justified in treating them this way, stating things like, you made me do it. You're always making me mad. It's never your fault. The acceptance of you being the problem. Both sides have issues to work on. Both sides carry a sense of severe pathology, psychopathology that involves disruptive and even dangerous, life-threatening behavior. This is a cycle that is taught from one generation to another potentially, because the way we behave, particularly around children, we're indirectly acclimating our children to how to function in relationships, what to accept, how to respond, and how to treat other people in a dysfunctional manner. There's so many sessions that I've been involved in that they stated, well, I saw my dad treat my mom like this, or I saw my mom have to take this, and she didn't care. She came out okay. What's going on, Alonzo Hall? Appreciate you for Unadulterated Truth for being here. My brother Kay is in the house, and Femi with the smoke. It is important for us to understand that in our community, domestic violence in many situations is overlooked and not given a lot of attention. In the Black community, we have a tendency of saying, I'm gonna mind my own damn business. I ain't got nothing to do with that. I'm gonna stay out of that. Whether they married, particularly if they married, it's none of my business. I mind my business. Yes. Yeah, people were crazy talking about Cassie stayed because she wanted money. No, these people were mentally ill. Yes, when you were being beaten spiritually, physically, psychologically, you're not thinking rationally. Now, yes, did money come to play, particularly at the end? But money doesn't make up for the years of abuse and suffering and torture that one had to endure. So in retrospect to that, I think it is important that we support the victims. But more importantly, we don't judge the victim. We support the victim, but we don't enable the victim to think that they can always just, come and they just want us to help. The victim needs to understand that the parties that are involved in helping them only want to help if you take yourself out of a situation that does not allow you to be abused. Continuing to go back to the same person, whether you want them to change, is not going to stop you from being abused. I don't think that cutting them off or no longer talking to them is the right thing to do. But I do think that if you can assist that person in having the means to leave, that's the only discussion that should be exercised. You can only give so much social support, emotional support, but many of these women feel financially trapped. Therefore, they cannot leave. And the perpetrator knows that they can't leave. That's the reason why they treat them the way they treat them, because they don't think they can go anywhere. And they say harmful words like nobody wants you, you're not attractive, you're disgusting. I'm the only one that want you. Can't no one love you the way I do. This is the rhetoric that is spoken in a domestic violence relationship. So I just wanted to paint this picture. I hope this particular video can be reflective to you in a manner that will allow you to look at things a little differently as it involves parties that and people who speak on domestic violence, who admit to being a victim or a perpetrator. Because both sides are dysfunctional. Both sides, in many situations, have a track record of being dysfunctional with other men or women who treated them a certain way. And that's real. So, guys, I appreciate you all for being here today. This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. I just wanted to talk about domestic violence and how do I handle domestic violence issues. We're talking about a person here that's speaking to you right now who has treated people with domestic violence for well over 17 years. I did seek out a contract or accreditation that I was derailed from. I was BIP certified at one time, but more importantly, I had the experience beforehand, and I don't necessarily need that particular credential to provide those services. I'm currently providing those services as we speak. So once again, guys, this is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. I hope you all have a great day, and please subscribe and share the video. Peace.